Alright, I know someone has already just seen the title of this and is already throwing a fit about it, so I may as well start the video off by explaining very clearly what I mean when I say radical feminists are disgusting people. I'm using radical feminist the way you would use the term radical liberal. Like, depending on the circles you run in, you may have heard the term radical liberal or radlib before. And basically, it is a term used to describe someone who supports the current status quo as it is, but they cloak it using radical socialist language. You know, like, so they are just a liberal. They support liberal capitalism and liberal democracy and all that. But they just act as if they're a communist, right? Radical feminists are pretty much the same thing. They are people who don't actually oppose the patriarchy. They don't actually oppose patriarchal gender norms. They don't actually support women's liberation or anyone's liberation from gender norms at all. They just are basically reactionaries who support all of that stuff, but they cloak it and hide it using feminist rhetoric. By far the most common type of radfem, or at least the type that gets the most attention nowadays, are TERFs. And like it's literally the name, guys, trans exclusionary radical feminists. And TERFs are not really all that feminist when you look at, you know, their words, their actions, what they support, their rhetoric, the types of people they associate with, you know, things like that. They're not really that feminist. They are basically just reactionaries who really, really hate trans people, specifically trans women, and they just hide that by trying to say, oh no, we're trying to protect women, we're trying to look out for ourselves, we're trying to protect ourselves against the forces of men and the forces of blah blah blah, whatever else. So when I say that I hate radfems, keep in mind, I'm attacking TERFs as well. And they are one type of radfem, but they're not the only type. Like, there's also SWERFs, which is sex worker exclusionary radical feminist, and those are, again, basically just religious conservatives who really, really hate sex and hate anyone who has anything to do with it, like whether they're, you know, a stripper or escort or anything that has to do with that. Like, if they make any sort of money from it, then they are contributing to it somehow, and they are bad. And, you know, I realize that the Venn diagram of TERFs and SWERFs is basically a circle, but, you know, like, that's just another type. But, no, I'm basically talking about radfems as a whole here. And there's a specific type which I don't know if it has, like, a real label, but they seem to be growing, and there just seems to be more and more of them lately, and it's really getting under my skin, and I wanted to complain about it. So a couple of years ago, I saw this, like, copy pasta or something. It was like a rant I saw, I believe, on Reddit, and I have not been able to find it again, so maybe I'm just imagining it. But it was basically someone ranting about why nobody likes white liberal feminists. And basically what it comes down to is that they aren't really that interested in changing the status quo. They aren't interested in, you know, liberation of women or of anybody else. They just kind of want to insert a couple of women into positions of power. You know, like, put a couple of women in government and military and business, have a few of them be really powerful, and then suddenly everything's fixed. Like, that's their idea of feminism. It's like, I don't know, pop feminism, you could almost call it. The rant goes on about how black feminists don't like them because they aren't actually interested in solving things like police brutality, as long as women are some of the police doing the brutalizing. Middle Eastern feminists hate them because they aren't interested in, like, stopping wars or anything. They just kind of want to put a few women in positions of power, so they're giving orders and they're also doing some of the fighting. Like, it's unironically the more women drone pilots meme, like that. And intersectional feminists, which I guess that's the label I would fall under, I don't know, but they hate them because they aren't actually interested in, you know, solving poverty or anything like that. They just want to have a couple of women be wealthy and a couple of women be CEOs and such alongside men. And that's basically why a lot of people dislike specifically white liberal feminists. And I guess the definition of white liberal feminists used there would kind of be similar to what I'm calling radfems here, but whatever. Like, these are the people who, again, they don't actually want to change anything about society. They don't actually want to help people or fix things. They just want to insert themselves and a couple people like them into pre-existing power structure. Like, and because of that, they just focus on the most dumb shit that they can possibly focus on. Like, remember manspreading? Like, literally just dudes who sit with their legs a little bit too far apart, whether they're in public or on public transport or anything like that. Like, that was the ultimate villain of online Tumblr feminism for a while, was like, yes, men are doing this because they're evil. They're trying to display dominance. They want to show off their genitals to us, which, like, lady, if someone's sitting like that, it's probably just because it's a comfortable position. Like, if you see that and your mind immediately jumps to sex, like, that's your problem, okay? Not everything is that sexual. But I thought that mostly died out, but then I've been seeing it a couple of times brought up lately, like people complaining completely unironically about manspreading and just saying how this is a travesty, we must stop it. And I'm thinking, okay, even if I agreed with you that it was like an actual problem, it's fucking not. Let's be clear. Anyone who thinks that probably shouldn't be taken seriously. But like, even if I agreed with you that that was a problem, I'd be thinking, okay, there's much, much bigger things we could be focusing on right now. We could be focusing on like abortion rights and the high rate of sexual assault in some places and some professions, and, you know, just things like that, which seem like they affect much more people in much more negative ways than this. But the rad femmes aren't actually interested in that. They're interested in feeling superior and inserting themselves into the system that exists right now. They don't want to change the system because they want to have all the privileges that come with being high up in the system when they're there. And these are also the types of people that, like, don't take sexual assault of men seriously, or hell, just don't take men's problems seriously in general. Because I remember a long time ago, I don't see this much anymore, but like 10 years ago, whenever these people came across like anti-feminists or MRA types, Gamergator types, you know, like those sorts of people, whenever they came across them and they wanted to like rebut some of their complaints about feminism or whatever, they would just say, oh, well, actually the patriarchy hurts men as well, so you should oppose it too. And they are correct when they say that. But then when men complain about patriarchy and the ways it affects them, suddenly it's all our faults. Like, actually, this is the fault of patriarchy, therefore it's your fault personally. Like, the types of people that do that don't seem to actually understand what patriarchy is. Like, we don't wake up in the morning and say, yes, I will live in this type of society. Because if it was that simple, I would just choose not to live in that type of society. Because, I mean, again, because it screws other people over, and in some ways it screws me over. And rad femmes, like, I don't know if a lot of them really understand that they are rad femmes. I think a lot of them genuinely think that just complaining about manspreading on Twitter is like hardcore activism, and they see themselves as like on par with suffragettes from 110 years ago. Some of them probably think that. Some of them probably realize that they're not actually doing anything to fight the patriarchy or to fight systems as they exist now, and are just trying to insert themselves into it. Like, there have to be some that are aware of that. Like, at least TERFs, if nothing else. Like, some of them must be aware that that's what's going on. But I don't know. Like, a lot of them, like, they don't seem to want to liberate women so much as they just hate men. Like, I came to an epiphany about this recently, because if you look, again, at TERFs, then pretty much all of their rhetoric about hating trans women is about how, actually, those are men, that they aren't women, they're actually just men who are wearing a dress, and specifically they think that trans women are going to sexually assault people. Like, that's why they don't want them in changing rooms and such, and like that's a big part of their rhetoric. And when you think about it and you look at this a little deeper and you see some of the reasons why why they believe this and why they're like this, you realize that, okay, a lot of this stems from just a deep hatred and fear of cisgendered men. And like, J.K. Rowling is probably the most prominent TERF in the world right now, and she uses that as an excuse and as a cudgel. Like, she's experienced abuse from men in her past. Therefore, everything she says about trans people is accurate, and therefore, trans people are bad. Like, you know, that's basically where it comes from. Like, it's a deep hatred and deep fear of men. And it's kind of hard to blame them in some cases. Like, again, J.K. Rowling, and I'm sure a lot of other TERFs, and hell, a lot of women in general, have experienced abuse from men in their lives. And I'm not going to tell people how to deal with that, other than to say you do not get to turn your trauma into other people's pain. Okay? I have experienced some abuse in my past as well, from men and women, but I don't get to use that as an excuse to be a misogynist or to be any other sort of bigot. It's not acceptable. And generic radfems, while they're not transphobic the way TERFs are, which is, that they're one step above TERFs in that way, they have all the same issues where, like, they just really hate and fear men. And so to them, feminism isn't a way to liberate all people and to make the world a better place. It's not even a way to, like, make their own lives better and to give them better opportunities or anything like that. No, to them, feminism is just a weapon to be used against people that they hate, which in this case being cis men, specifically cis hetero men, but I'm sure they probably wouldn't think twice about hating gay men either. And look, I'm not trying to turn this into some sort of like, oh, actually, I'm the victim of all this stuff. I'm the real victim of transphobia and all that, like, because I know I'm not. But these people, well, I guess in one sense they do give feminism a bad name, but also they are just actively hurtful, because again, they don't take things like sexual assault of men seriously, and that is actively harmful to men who are victims of that and to society at large. Like, there's this straw man that people on the far right have of more progressive types about how when we rail against something like racism or misogyny or something, they think that that means we are never allowed to criticize minorities or we're never allowed to criticize women ever for any reason. And, like, you do see this occasionally. Like, if a black person says something stupid that conservatives happen to agree with, they'll post it and say, like, haha, so much for that, libs. How are you going to fight, or how are you going to disagree with this? You can't, because he's black, you're not allowed to disagree with him. And then everyone is like, well, no, obviously we're going to criticize a black person for having beliefs that we disagree with or for saying something or doing something stupid. And then their minds are like temporarily blown a little bit, but then they just point out some imaginary hypocrisy and pat themselves on the back, like, that sort of thing. And they do it with women as well, like, haha, how are you going to criticize women for having an opinion on things? And, like, they've been doing this again with J.K. Rowling a lot lately as sort of like justification for hating trans people. But, like, that's a straw man is what it is. Like, obviously people who are left-wing or more progressive or however you want to put that are still going to criticize individuals for doing shit like that. Except radfems kind of are this straw man. Like, they kind of really do think that you can't criticize women for things, except in specific instances. Or at the very least, men aren't allowed to criticize them for things. Because I have, not just on the internet, but in real life, been accused of being a misogynist for disagreeing with women. Like, not even for being disrespectful or rude or anything like that, just for disagreeing with them, I have been called a misogynist. Now, granted, a big part of that is from specifically TERFs, because I disagree with their transphobia, but also from just generic radfems. Like, I know that when I went on about manspreading not being a big deal, someone who sees this is going to genuinely be pissed about that. Like, if you're a person who saw this and saw my manspreading thing and thought, like, okay, yeah, he's right, that's not that big a deal, then you're probably not a radfem, you're fine. But if you're someone who, like, seethed with rage and is typing up, actually, it's a big deal, because then you're a radfem and I don't like you. I don't know, like, it just feels like a lot of these people in different circumstances would be fascists, or at the very least would be open about the fact that they are reactionaries. Because, I mean, for, like, again, white women specifically, but just women in general, you can become part of the system as it is. Like, you can become part of the ruling system, you can become part of Congress or whatever, without actually changing anything. Like, you can leave stuff exactly as it is, and therefore you can become powerful. But that is fundamentally a conservative, reactionary position to hold, and conservatives and reactionaries generally aren't happy with women being in positions of power, so they have to be a conservative reactionary while also dressing that up in hashtag girlboss type language. And I don't know, I don't really have a strong closer for this, but I just wanted to say radfems are genuinely disgusting people, and it's time we stop taking them seriously.